There is a change in our second reading today. 11 days in Israel will do that to you. We are going to be reading from Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. It's page 59 in the New Testament portion of the Bible, should you wish to follow along. Luke 2, 41 through 52. Now, every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in divine and human favor. Please pray with me. Heard, and the spaces in between. Grant us a measure of wisdom. Amen. Little Billy was a curious young fellow, always asking questions. Still, it surprised his mother when one morning at breakfast he asked, "Where did I come from?" He was only 6, and his mother wasn't prepared for such a question, but she took a deep breath, decided to plunge ahead, and launched into the whole birds and bees story. Finally, she finishes up. "Yeah," says Billy, "but Tommy said he came from Pittsburgh. Where do I come from?" My wife has a clear answer when folks ask her where she comes from. A little town in upstate New York, she tells them, called Gloversville. It's halfway between Albany and Utica. When I'm asked the same question, I'm usually a bit more vague because we moved a few times when I was a kid. Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. So I usually just say New England. The badges of our members have their name, the place they live when they're here, and the place up north where they're from originally. Where do you come from? It's a great conversation starter. And often, learning about a person's hometown, a person's place of origin, goes part of the way to help understanding who they are. We New Englanders, for instance, are known to be somewhat taciturn on the whole and enormously frugal. New Yorkers are considered to always be in a rush. Folks from the deep South are usually thought to be quite genteel. And Midwesterners, so many of you are Midwesterners, are known for their more laid-back approach to life. But as useful as it is to know a person's place of origin, a more revealing question might be, who cares about you? Who loves you? Who would miss you if you were to suddenly disappear? Knowing my mother, who loves me, cares about me, and would miss me if I suddenly disappeared, or at least she tells me that. Knowing her, as some of you do, tells you something about me. Knowing my wife, Linda, who loves me, cares about me, says she would miss me if I suddenly disappeared, gives you an inside look at who I am. Jesus would have been known by both the place where he lived, Nazareth, and by the people who cared about him, the people who loved him. There's more than one incident in the Gospels where he's identified as coming from Nazareth or as being the son of Mary and Joseph. In fact, in that ancient culture, he would have been known as Yeshua ben Yosef. The Hebrew word ben means son of. So he was known as Yeshua, son of Yosef, or in English, Jesus, son of Joseph. We can learn a lot about Jesus just by knowing that Nazareth was a small town in a rather rural area. It's in the mountainous part of Israel and is built on hills. People who grow up in the mountains, our anthropologist guide on our recent trip to Israel told us, people who grow up in mountains tend to be more resilient. Perhaps that resilience helps explain Jesus' ability to endure torture and the crucifixion. Jewish law, contained in the first 5 books of the Bible, frequently mentions that the reader is to welcome the stranger. So that would have been part of his upbringing as well. Our story from Luke, the most extensive passage in the gospel about his childhood, in fact, the only passage in the Gospels about his childhood, also tells us much. Jesus travels to Jerusalem at the age of 12 with his parents, his extended family, and more than likely most of his fellow Nazarenes. The whole village goes together. They go there to celebrate Passover. Many of them are related to one another. That's the way it often works in small towns. I remember one of the small towns I served in Maine as pastor, and I'd been there for a good year before I caught on to the fact that it didn't matter who I was talking to, they were related to somebody else that I knew, and I just better be careful what I said. That's how small towns work. There was always a cousin, an aunt, an uncle somewhere close at hand. So the fact that on their return to Nazareth, his parents go for a full day without noticing he's missing was not due to parental neglect. In fact, I would suggest it was due to parental trust, parental willingness to let Jesus have a measure of independence. And besides that, helicopter parents hadn't been invented yet. But somewhere along the line, Mary and Joseph discover that he's not with Uncle Benjamin or Cousin Esther. Rather, he's missing. So Mary and Joseph make their way back to Jerusalem. They search high and low. They check down every narrow alleyway. They look through the marketplace. They go to the homes of anyone they know in the holy city. Finally, they think to see if he's in the temple. And he is, sitting with the rabbis and the elders, listening to all they have to teach, and asking them profound questions. At first, Mary and Joseph are a bit dismayed. "We've looked all over for you, Jesus." To which he replies, "Didn't you realize I'd need to be here in my Father's house?" I can just picture them shaking their heads and telling him, "Come on home, boy." And he does. He goes back to the place and the people who had nurtured him and given him the confidence to wrestle with difficult ideas. We can only assume that Mary and Joseph didn't try to shut him down when he asked a challenging question, but rather encouraged him to think for himself, as obviously they both had. After all, they had found a way to work through the challenges of an unplanned pregnancy. So they returned to Nazareth, and, says Luke, he grows in stature and wisdom. Yes, knowing about the courage shown by Joseph when he agreed to go through with the marriage despite Mary's being pregnant, knowing about the willingness of Mary to follow God's lead and take on the task of raising this boy who would be the Messiah, such things tell us a lot about Jesus himself. I thought about all this over the last 2 weeks as our interfaith group traipsed through Israel. For all along the way, we had the privilege of meeting men and women, parents, who were setting examples for their children, examples that very well might change the course of history in that troubled and often violent land. For the way they were raising their children, the values they are passing on, and the examples they are setting can't help but impact their sons and daughters. For instance, a week ago last Friday, we attended Shabbat services, Sabbath services, at Harel, a Reformed Jewish synagogue in Jerusalem. Then following the service, our group was divided into 2 smaller groups. There were 40 of us altogether, so 2 groups of 20 each. And we went to share dinner with Jewish Israelis in their own homes. Shabbat dinner is the high point of the week for many Jewish families. It's not unusual for folks outside the immediate family to be included, even strangers like us, for the Torah does indeed encourage welcoming the stranger. The meal is accompanied by prayers and singing and special blessings for the children. It is a long meal by American standards, no Big Mac and fries, but it is a meal filled with reminders of Jewish heritage, of the basic values that are adhered to, and of the importance of being devoted to God. Last Sunday, we worshiped at the Church of the Redeemer, a Lutheran church in Jerusalem. There are 4 congregations in the church, 4 congregations divided by languages. One is Arabic-speaking, one Danish-speaking, one German-speaking, and one English-speaking. For the high holidays of Christianity, all 4 congregations come together and share worship. Those services, we were told, take a very long time as you go through each part of the service in each of those 4 languages. It must be a bit like Pentecost. The pastor of the English-speaking congregation, Carrie Ballinger, is an American who's been there now for 5 years. She spoke with us after the service and shared how she was going to be facing empty nests soon as her children are all off to college. Imagine what those children are taking with them. All the lessons about life that they have learned from their parents. All the lessons they've learned from Carrie and her husband about being willing to take the risks of living in a distant land, of working alongside of those who are native to the country, taking the same chances that they do. Carrie and her congregants and the other 3 congregations are all involved in sponsoring schools in the area for Muslim and Christian children who learn together, side by side, not in order to convert anyone to anything, but in order to discover that it is possible for people of different faiths to live together in peace. Over that same weekend, as you may have read about in the papers or seen in the news here, tensions erupted in Jerusalem and in Israel as a whole, as they often do, and hundreds of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip into the southern part of Israel. Israel responded with airstrikes over Gaza. Many were injured, some killed on both sides. We were scheduled as part of our trip to go to the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and we almost changed our itinerary. But then a ceasefire was declared, and the rockets and the airstrikes ended. So we went ahead with our scheduled visit. But it was a powerful reminder for us all, as my co-leader Rabbi Fuchs put it, that we can change our itinerary. Folks who live there can't. I am so grateful that we didn't have to change our itinerary, for we had the opportunity to meet with Samarit Zamir, a woman who's lived in the collective Moshav Netiv HaHarsa with her husband and children for over 20 years now. The threats of attack are ever present, and scattered all around her community are bomb shelters. And every home, every single home, and every public building has a safe room, a place to go when rockets are fired. And when the sirens go off, indicating a rocket has been launched, they have 5 seconds to get to safety. 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But Samarit told us, "This is my home," and she has no intention of moving. But she does intend to work for the day when rockets and airstrikes stop. And so she has founded an organization called Path to Peace. And she's opened her home to visitors to hear about her efforts and those of others who are working for peace. Between the Gaza Strip and Israel, there is a border fence. And around her collective, there is a wall. Between the two, there is a section of land not more than 100 yards wide. When you step into that space, you are looking right across the border at the Gaza Strip. And folks at the other side are looking right back at you. Samarit is a ceramic tile artist, and so she decided to put her skills to work for peace. Along that wall, that concrete wall that surrounds her collective, facing right into Gaza, she's created a mural covered with peace symbols and words for peace in English, in Arabic, in Hebrew. Peace, salam, shalom. She's created thousands of brightly colored tiles, some with words or symbols for peace, others with splotches of color. When she takes visitors to that open space, she invites them to take a tile, write a prayer on the back of it or an encouraging word, and then adhere it to the wall. We each on the trip had the opportunity to do just that. Imagine what Samarit's children are learning. Lessons about courage, dedication to home, and a willingness to take risks for peace. So where do you come from? Who cares about you? Who loves you? And what does that say about who you are? And what about those who have come after you? What can folks learn about them? Your children, your nieces, your nephews? What can they learn about them by knowing you? What lessons, what values have you passed on as mother, father, aunt, uncle, grandparent? What truths have you shared with your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, or even the kids down the street? What we say, what we do, can indeed make all the difference in the world we will leave behind. Make no mistake about it. As the old song from South Pacific, a song we thought about often on the trip, reminds us, you've got to be carefully taught to hate. But you've also got to be carefully taught to love and respect the stranger, the person across the border, the person of differing religious beliefs, of different races, of different ethnicities, of different sexual orientations. You've got to be carefully taught. What will you leave behind for those who follow?